my name is Sarah and I make videos about movies, vintage shopping, and running an online store. Here, let me adjust your television set. Guys, I want to talk about Mortal Engines. It is another one of these epic, multi-saga, young adult, adapted into film, like Valerian and 1,000 Cities, I think is what it's called, and The Darkest Minds, Mortal Engines. It's set like 1,000 years after the collapse of civilization. There's some kind of energy-based explosion that destroys most of civilization, and at this point, some have taken it upon themselves to rebuild parts of it. How this came to be is not really explained, but at this point, cities are not on land. They are built up on these motorized vehicles. I guess it's dangerous to live in one place, so they don't. For example, the city of London is on wheels, basically. And the city is not just what you see on the outside, where you got, poor folk living on the bottom. The higher you go, the more richer people live on the top, of course. You can see like grass and gardens and stuff on the top, and underneath it's just like houses stacked up like Legos. This is a moving vehicle. There are moving parts to it. It opens up like some weird kind of transformer toy. They can move levels, which the mechanics of that don't make no sense. Being able to move buildings and crap around at will. The fact that they never really explain, like, what are they doing? Do they just drive around in the city of London looking for smaller cities to absorb? And how are you able to do that? More people, less resources? I really wanted the big reveal to be that they're eating people. Like Soylent Green, like in that movie Cloud Atlas. I really wanted that to be the case where, they say it's algae, but it's really, they don't talk about money. They don't talk about like money translations, like this will buy you this, which would give us a better idea of the value of things. If you're rich, you have colorful clothes, your clothes are clean, you can go upstairs where there's air, like clean air. The lower down you go, the dirtier people are. People wearing gray. And they apparently don't have very many options for people other than like sanitation and taking care of what's down there, mechanics, things like that. It's all very vague and generalized. See, there were things that I didn't understand. I guess it's set into the future. After humanity starts over, people wear clothes, people wear pants and shirts and have jackets. It made it difficult to believe. There's one man, his name is Valentine, who is in charge of figuring out a way to solve the energy problem that they're having. So at the same time, there's also what they call a rebel group. So London says that they're the enemy. So London is where we start. We are following a plucky young librarian, which the word librarian still exists. See, this is the problem that I have with y'all adapting these super popular young adult novels quick. When you're adapting stuff for film, stuff has to make sense. You have to figure out a way to organize storylines, plots, character development so that when people watch it, it makes sense. So certain words don't mean the same thing. See, this is what happens when we're starting a civilization over. In this movie, they just want you to meet your two main protagonists and follow them on a journey. And as they continue on their journey, they fall in love. And the world almost comes to an end, but doesn't, because they saved the day. I was mad for watching it. I'm sure the books do a better job. Like, I read all the Hunger Games books before I watched them movies. So I knew where some of the difficulties lie, but I also watch a lot of movies. So I didn't have a problem with the way that they organized series of events and organized information so that people would be able to understand it at a glance. There's not enough effort given to develop the characters enough for you to give a crap about anybody, really. When I watch a movie, I want to see how the story ends. I want to know what happens. Here, I did not care what happens. And this is like maybe 15 minutes in when Valentine's daughter goes into the library and the little librarian guy clearly has a crush on her. He did a bunch of stuff that was not authentic to his character. Stepping between Valentine and a blade when everybody else moved back. Not even the security forces or whatever they were didn't move forward to help him. And the idea that somehow out of everybody, because it was super crowded down there, there was like 100 people down there or more coming from that other city, that somehow she would have caught his eye was not believable at all. Him trying to rescue him following her, period, as she tries to escape. Him trying to rescue her as she attempts to make it out. So she's there to kill him. He is responsible for her mother's death. The fact that she got that, which people looking at her crazy because she has that scar on her face didn't make any sense because of the world that they live in. So it didn't make sense that people kept noticing it to me. If you guys have seen Mad Max Fury Road, I don't know what their group is called, but them girls that was keeping locked up, their skin was super smooth. And they were like mostly unblemished and like well fed and all this stuff. People stared. And that's because everybody else was filthy, dirty, and sunburned and starving. So it made sense for people to notice that they were like well kept. People constantly pointing out her scar didn't make no sense because of the world that they live in, where people are, selling other people off for money, and there was that insinuation of cannibalism briefly while they were on the auctioneer's block. The auctioneer, who had what looks like somebody else's scalp for hair and a suit made of buttons, was like really dark and made a lot more sense for the world that they live in than people constantly pointing out her scars. When she was injured, like severely injured for him, I was like, oh no. Why would you do that? I mean, really, if you can't walk, you will die. Like, the point is that you can't stand still. You can't be in one place. People will find you, which was odd because she knew better. See, this is what I'm talking about. You can't switch up a character's personality or the way that they would react to things mid-movie. Like, she was gonna leave him there to die when he farted out the back of London into the dirt. She robbed him and had every intentions of leaving him there. And instead of just leaving him there, she let him follow her and she gave him some of her food. What? She stabbed him one good time. The fact that he didn't die, that was disappointing and didn't make no sense because he got stabbed in the gut. He should have died. The technology that they're using for a lot of stuff there is old. Nothing is like really automated. They need people, mechanics, technicians to run everything. When they go into the main center where they steer the ship, it's like 20 people in there pushing buttons and pulling levers and turning dials and stuff. So the fact that he survived, number one, and then when he took that, I don't even know if they call them planes, when he took that plane to the prison, which the fact that they have the resources to establish a prison anywhere, this one happened to be in the ocean. You could just throw them in, you could just drop them into the ocean. Who has the money or like resources to spare feeding and housing in this economy? None of the characters were very interesting. Like, the rich girl comes to the library to check out a book. What is her goal besides being the daughter of Valentine, the most well-known archaeologist in London? He has a lot of influence and a lot of power. He's like the mayor's right-hand man. What is the purpose of her studies? It would be different if she was just like, I just want to be cute and take advantage of the fact that my father is that guy. But instead she makes it seem like she cares. I didn't feel anything for her. I didn't feel sympathetic. Also, where's her mother? So I was like, what is the purpose of her character? She comes in at the last minute to kind of save the day, but not really. Anybody could have did that. It was like they didn't want to acknowledge the viewer at all, or they assumed that the audience had already read the books, because I had no idea what they were talking about. When the guy who ran the prison was like, I lost a bunch of men, I was like, you can't afford to lose nobody nowhere. To capture this one man, and then it turns out to not quite be a man, and the fact that they didn't explain in more detail where the revenant men came from, which they sound like Frankenstein's monsters. Men that were some cockamamie experiment. When, in relation to the time period that we're in now, don't know. How did they find out about this specific experiment out of all of the information that they don't have access to, because a lot of it blew up? How did they find out about this one? I don't know. Men who were the subject of a bunch of different kinds of experiments that, so they're like cyborg robots that can act independently and are not limited by a program or anything. They just be walking around here. So they escape. Valentine doesn't die. Not from that. So they're at the auctioneer's block and they're about to be made into sausage. And they end up getting rescued by this woman who is like a wanted criminal on London. She is genuinely the most interesting character in the entire movie. She has depth, she has a past, she has motivations, connections to other people, she has a strong sense of purpose, and she's a badass. We're 2/3 of the way through before we get to meet her. So the revenant man having a beef with the main character, and it turns out to be much more complicated. Her monologue of how they met and him basically raising her since she was a child was one of the few highlights. Their relationship and the depth of it was very touching. The fact that she allowed him to, instead of just explaining to Shrike what she was gonna do, she leaves in the middle of the night without explanation. And he kills a lot of people to get to her. Really, if anybody could have just deaded this whole thing, it would have been Shrike. If she was like, I want to kill this man, he is responsible for my mother's death, I want him to die, he could have did it. He is not alive and he is incredibly strong. He could have climbed up the side of London and just a quick one of these and the whole story would have been over. When it's like an obvious hole in the story, and in this case so many, it was really hard to stay engaged with anything that was going on. I wouldn't recommend it because I just think it has some interesting details, and if you feel like you're missing out on something, but I wouldn't recommend it. I was just irritated. The way that you guys are organizing these events is confusing. We can't orient ourselves in the world that we're in, so it's hard to figure out what we're doing here. It would be different if we could see that they had an army, but they don't have an army. They have a city full of people, full of mechanics and technicians and people in the service industry, people who are not prepared to invade another country. If you destroy the resource that you're trying to steal, how much sense does that make? It was very odd. It was like, what is the real plan here? At the end, Valentine bites it because of course he does. They get together because of course they do. It was just a really long story with some weird events in it, and we know who the bad guys are, we know who the good guys are, so by the end of it you're just rooting for the good guys and booing the bad guys. And then the story ends with them flying into the sunset. Maybe I'm just ignorant because I didn't read the books or anything beforehand, but you all let me know, and I'll see you all next time.